lot of therapies draw heavily from frameworks that personality theorists have created and that are still being tested to date. Today, I'm going to be briefly looking at classic psychoanalytic theory. So, not what's being practiced today, but something that Freud proposed long ago. Now, as you know, Freud emphasized the role of unconscious primal urges on the one hand, clashing with societal norms on the other hand. And this sort of resulted in an internal conflict and compromises in many ways. It compromised our actions, according to him. Building upon Freud's initial foundation, there was other theorists, I mean, which all of you all surely know about: Jung, Adler, Karen Horney, Sullivan, Erickson. They either broadened or diverged from his starting point of his ideas. So Jung, for instance, he looked at other concepts such as the collective unconscious. Unlike Freud's personal unconscious, which contains an individual's repressed memories and experiences, the collective unconscious, it holds like a universal experience and knowledge, and I think of it like a shared cloud storage. But Jung he spoke about archetypes. He spoke about symbols and themes such as a hero, mother, shadow, vagare vagare. Adler, he emphasized social interest, our innate need to belong and to cooperate. Karen Horney, she focused on anxiety, its powerful influence on personality. Then you had Sullivan and Erickson, they highlighted the importance of relationships and cultural influences in development. So despite all of these diverse perspectives, many of these theorists, they converged on some key points. One is they all recognized internal conflict. So, say for instance, you feel something, but you would be scoffed at or looked down upon if people knew that you felt that way. So, this internal conflict sort of resulted in a form of anxiety that fundamentally then would drive a person's behavior or what they chose to say and do outwardly, right? Secondly, they also emphasize the significance of understanding both the conscious purpose, meaning the more obvious influencers, and the unconscious root, which is the hidden or private influencers of our action. But let's get on with Freud. Psychology, as you know, broke away from philosophy and became its own thing in the 1870s. You read about Wilhelm Wundt, William James, Stanley Hall, etc., etc. Back then, psychologists felt under a bit of pressure to be more like other scientists of the time and to attempt a sort of deconstruction of consciousness, like how one would dissect a frog under a microscope. And so some of them thought that maybe our experiences were made up of building blocks, linked to our senses. So, for example, the experience of, say, eating an apple could be broken down into the taste of its sweetness, the smell of the apple, the feeling of its skin, its redness. That there's a lot that's been written on that. Of course, later these theories were criticized for being oversimple or trying for their oversimplification or reductionisticness. That's my own word. But there were arguments going on. Some scientists said, come on, the mind is too private and subjective for scientific study. Let psychology just stick to observable behavior, not hidden mental processes. Study what people do, not what they think or feel. Then came along Sigmund Freud, who sort of challenged this status quo. I mean, triggered by, as I have spoken earlier, by what Bertha Pappenheim, better known as Anna O, had told his colleague Joseph Breuer, who was her doctor, that she felt better when she spoke about her problems. She had called it talking cure. I spoke about studies on hysteria in my last talk, so I'm not going to get into that. But Freud collaborated with Breuer and then eventually went on to compare the mind to an iceberg, with most of it lurking beneath the surface in the unconscious. He believed that this hidden part of ourselves, filled with urges and passions and repressed memories, was the real driving force behind our uh, observable thoughts and actions, which are just, what you see on top. Now, Freud's ideas were controversial at the time, but he developed a sort of a comprehensive framework of personality. I think many of you are taught about free association as being his technique. But, as you grow older, as you read more and more, you realize that he probably learned about free association from a paper written by Francis Galton, who, by the way, was a racist, but that's different. written in the paper was published in, if I'm not mistaken, Brain. You have to check that, but in around 1879. What Freud did was he adopted and developed this technique. So Freud is known to want to investigate the depths of this underwater, hidden from view mind, and he mapped out its corners, its topography, he traced its energy sources, and these are all hypothetical, right? But anyway, this is what his personality theory is. It's a theory, and he charted its development from childhood to adulthood. In this classic structure, he proposed that personality is made up of three major systems: the id, the ego, the superego. I'm going to be repeating some things here and there in these slides, but I think um, it will make sense in the end. So, the id is the most primitive part of the personality, it's present at birth. It's driven by the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification of biological urges like hunger or thirst. It operates sort of unconsciously and is not concerned with reality or consequences, and it relies on very reflexive actions to reduce this sort of tension. And it also uses what is known as primary process, wishful thinking. Hemi nantar explain karein. I'll come to this later. But the ego develops as, now we're going to the ego, Baraka. The ego develops as a child interacts with the external world. So now the child is learning. And the ego operates according to the reality check, the reality principle, because it recognizes that immediate gratification is not always possible. Atta cha atta hava hai. I want it and I want it now. So the ego sort of mediates between the demands of the id and the constraints of reality. I mean, so it uses secondary processes such as logical thinking, problem solving, I think rationalizing things to find appropriate ways to sort of satisfy its needs. It controls your intellectual functions, it helps make decisions, take action in the real world where the action would be sort of acceptable. The superego काय करतं now? Superego sort of internalizes sort of societal values and morals, and it sort of scarlet letters a person. So it learns from parents and authority figures. It represents, it's not always a good thing, but it represents the ideal self and strives for perfection. I said that because parents are not always right, authority is not always right. You need to have, anyway, these are theories that I'm speaking about. So it represents the ideal self and it strives for perfection. It acts as a sort of moral compass of the personality, and it consists of two subsystems. First is, according to Freud, the conscience. Conscience, yes, that's right, which punishes wrongdoing with guilt. And the second is the ego ideal, which rewards good behavior with pride. So the superego's primary functions are to inhibit the id's impulses, to persuade the ego to pursue moralistic goals, to strive for perfection. And healthy personality functions, they involve a sort of well-balanced relationship between these systems. Okay, so basically, according to me, there are three takeaways. First is, yes, there are many more, but in what I just said, the three takeaways are that Freud compared the mind to an iceberg. He believed that dreams were a window into the unconscious mind, hence he developed this method of dream interpretation to uncover the hidden meanings behind the symbols, the hiddenness of it all. And there's been debunking of many things that has happened over time, but we're not getting to that. And third is that he identified many defense mechanisms that the ego uses to protect itself from, anxiety-provoking thoughts, feelings, and mechanisms that can distort reality, but that also serve as an important function to maintain your well-being. How he went about this is what I'm going to be speaking about. A sort of little interesting detail amongst academics who've been doing this for years is what we know as the id, ego, and superego were originally written in German as, now I cannot pronounce that, so I'm not going to, but those things there. And these could be better translated into Marathi as te, me, and माझ्या पलीकडे, or beyond me. And the translator of Freud's work chose to use Greek or Latin terms, possibly, I think, to make the text sound more medical and scientific. But for a clearer understanding of Freud's ideas, he used simpler words it's recommended to read his work in the original German if possible. Unfortunately, I don't read German. Freud also borrowed the term in ego and superego. That is now this slide, that is related to the other slide, but I just want to share that from another author named George Grodek. Again, my pronunciations are probably really bad, but forgive me. Now, George Grodek drew inspiration from Nietzsche's philosophy, and but Freud developed and elaborated on these concepts significantly in his own psychoanalytic theory, and he wrote about it slightly differently. And I feel this highlights how words and ideas often have very complex origins and influences. And we all know, right? All roads lead to Nietzsche, our North Star of existentialism. I'm joking, don't quote me on that. Another example of potentially confusing translation choices is the term cathexis, which comes from the Greek word cathexis. There was no need for the translator, I think, to use such complicated words because in the original German, the word is that. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it could be translated into Marathi as vyavasai. Vyavasai manje occupation. So it's meant as directing all your energy towards something specific. Energy manje mental energy, and how or why I'm going to come to that in my next slide. See, when you look at the dynamics of personality, you have to remember that Freud was totally influenced by deterministic and positivistic philosophies. Manje kai? People like Auguste Comte's philosophy, which asserted that the only authentic knowledge is scientific knowledge. It has to be derived from empirical evidence. It has to be derived from logical reasoning. Or determinist philosophies, manje like Darwin's natural selection, which is the driving force behind biological evolution. Vagare, vagare. So, in that sense, it was plain and simple. Physicists and scientists of his time, I mean, think about it. He slightly senior to him was Max Planck. Ernest Rutherford, I think, was younger to him, but there was Marie Curie, Albert Einstein. These are all his contemporaries, younger and older, but in his era. And these were all people who were exploring the fundamental forces of the universe. There was so much happening with the fundamental interchangeability of energy. I mean, be it mechanical, thermal, electromagnetic. Also, I'm sure many of you all must have seen Oppenheimer, right? So all of that was going on around that time. So Freud, I think, also sought to dissect the basic energies driving human behavior, our drives, something like a complex energy system that could be transformed and channeled into diverse functions from the physiological processes. So I told you, he wanted something solid, right? Physiology. So you breathe, you eat. That gets transformed into higher order mental activities of perception, thought, memory. And there's a back and forth there. You've heard of James Joule. I like this photograph of the steam engine, so I put it there, and that's Gandhiji. The law of conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transform from one form to another. So in school they taught you this about how potential energy can transform into kinetic energy and so on. So Freud proposed that the energy powering our physical existence was not different from the energy powering our mental existence. It's merely a matter of transformation and redirection of energy, conservation of energy, just like in physics. So energy has to be defined in terms of the work it performs. It's vyavasai. If the vyavasai consists of psychological activities such as thinking, then he called this form of energy psychic energy. Simple. It follows from this that psychic energy may be transformed into physiological energy or ulta, right? So this is what he said. No need to get intimidated when you all read him. Now there's a bridge that is needed between the energy of the body and the energy of the mind or that personality. So when the id, being the most primal part of the personality, it's directly connected. It's plugged in directly to your bodily physical needs and urges. It has it has a reservoir of energy called instincts. Instincts are like fossil fuels. They are drives, they are motivators. Yeah, with me so far. Now we have instincts such as eros. Just to give you an example, is a drive for survival, procreation, pleasure, or thanatos, not to be mistaken with Thanos, please, is a drive towards aggression, destruction, and ultimately a return to inanimate state, basically death. And all of these reside within the id. Psychologically, he said that they represent very raw biological drives that, when depending on what we do with them, say they are either expressed or repressed, shape our psychological experiences. So when they're transformed and channeled, they drive our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, or they fuel our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So, as an example, you have a biological or physical state of hunger. Physically, you may call it a condition of nutritional deficit in the tissues of the body, right? But psychologically, it could be represented as a wish for food. And the wish is your motivation for your actions or behaviors. If you're hungry, you may seek food. So you may also become more sensitive to particular kinds of stimulation. So a hungry person is more sensitive to food related stimulation, and sexually aroused person is more likely to respond to erotic stimulation or stimuli. Sorry. Someone who loves books may always be on the lookout for books. So, we are more sensitive to those kind of stimuli. So, simply put, I did that on purpose. That's called a Freudian slip. Within Freud's framework, an instinct isn't merely a biological urge, it's a fundamental unit, or it's a quantum of psychic energy. There's a change of hands at work here. So, with this energy, right? Think of it as a specific demand placed on the mind, like a call to action that requires mental work. You need to like, you need to subscribe. So, this mental work can manifest as thoughts, emotions, behaviors aimed at satisfying your instinctual drives. And the sum total of all our instincts, which form the reservoir of this psychic energy, again, like I'm repeating, like the fossil fuels, it fuels our entire personality. And Freud suggests that we can conceptualize these instinctual energies as the demand for work placed upon your mind. The greater the instinctual drive, the more the psychic energy is required to address it. So I'm repeating just so you learn this. So Freud proposed that this was known as a tension reduction model. And so the behavior of a person is activated by internal irritants and subsides as soon as an appropriate action removes this irritation. The core idea is how, for instance, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. So our behaviors are driven by the internal tensions or irritants. For example, hunger, thirst, sexual desire, and they create discomfort. They build up the steam, like in a steam locomotive. And to relieve and release this pressure, we might take action that satisfies this underlying need. When once met, the tension is reduced and we experience a sense of pleasure or relief, or perhaps as we mature, we develop slightly more sophisticated ways of dealing with these instincts. We may choose to delay gratification, or we may choose to find more socially acceptable ways to satisfy our needs. So there's a lot more of Freud that I can go on and on about, but I'm going for a 20-day digital detox by myself to a forest. So my apologies. Perhaps I'll start uploading more videos next month if I get the time. I've given no references at all for this video because it's Freud's core concepts. So you can read about that anywhere, in any textbook. Also add to it his original writings, because you don't want to only read textbooks. Different authors of textbooks have different biases. Perhaps I have my own biases. So not perhaps, I do have my own biases. And let me know if there's anything specific that you need to be explained, and I'll try my best to explain it if again I get the time to do so. Cheers.